On February 23, 1943, something extraordinary was happening in a Berlin laboratory. At Telefunken headquarters, a military scientist named Wilhelm Runge held a magnifying glass with trembling hands, studying a piece of copper salvage retrieved from an aircraft wreckage just weeks before. His hands weren't shaking from cold or fatigue, they were shaking because what he was looking at shouldn't exist. "This cannot be real," he scribbled into his classified technical report. "No nation could possibly achieve this level of miniaturization while producing this kind of power output simultaneously." Outside the laboratory windows, smoke continued to rise from bombed-out factories across Berlin, a constant reminder of Allied air superiority raining down on the German capital. But here on his workbench lay something far more disturbing than any bombing campaign. Physical proof that the technological gap between Germany and Britain was vastly wider than anyone in the high command had been willing to admit. The device before him, pulled from a British bomber wreckage near Rotterdam on February 2nd, was barely larger than a coffee cup, just 10 centimeters across. This cavity magnetron, as the British engineers had named it, generated microwave radar frequencies that rendered every German countermeasure completely useless. It was elegant in its simplicity, devastating in what it meant, and far beyond anything German engineering had achieved. What neither Runge nor the other German scientists yet realized was that this single copper object would answer a terrifying mystery that had been costing Admiral Karl Dönitz 40 submarines every single month. The German U-boat fleet was hemorrhaging men and machines at an unsustainable rate, threatening to lose the entire Atlantic battle within weeks. The mathematical certainty of German defeat wasn't being written in naval strategy documents or military planning tables. It was being written in electromagnetic wavelengths that German radar receivers simply could not sense. The psychological world was beginning to transform. On that bitterly cold February morning in Rotterdam, members of the Dutch resistance watched German soldiers rushing around the bomber crash site with unusual speed and urgency. The Sterling bomber, marked with the serial number R9264 and belonging to 7 Squadron RAF, had been returning from only its second combat mission when anti-aircraft fire had ripped through its port wing. All 7 crew members died instantly in the crash, but their deaths would ultimately serve the Allied cause more profoundly than anyone could have imagined. The aircraft carried something revolutionary inside it. Britain's newest secret weapon, the H-2S ground mapping radar system, was designed to let bomber crews navigate accurately and find their targets through clouds and complete darkness. At the heart of this system lay the cavity magnetron, a piece of technology so sensitive that Winston Churchill himself had wrestled agonized over whether to deploy it. The bomber had been carrying this device on only its second operational mission, part of a raid on Cologne following H-2S's first combat use against Hamburg just 3 days earlier on January 30th. Within hours of the crash, General Wolfgang Martini arrived at the scene. As chief of the Luftwaffe's signals intelligence and one of Germany's most respected radar experts, he understood immediately that this Rotterdam wreck might contain answers to questions that had been troubling German commanders for months. As the officer responsible for all German radar development and signals intelligence, Martini possessed the expertise and authority to evaluate whatever technology the British bomber contained. Martini sent his most experienced technical teams to work the crash site. What they found confirmed his worst fears and greatest hopes all at once. The bomber's interior held equipment unlike anything German forces had ever encountered. The rotating antenna assembly, the cathode ray display system, the sophisticated power supply. Everything pointed to radar technology operating on principles that German engineers had theorized about but dismissed as impractical for any real military operation. But when his team carefully extracted the transmitter assembly from the wreckage, when they examined the component that powered this mysterious system, they found something that shattered German understanding of what was possible. The magnetron itself, designated as British Model CV-64, was a solid copper cylinder, roughly 8 centimeters in diameter and 12 centimeters long. 8 cylindrical cavities had been precisely machined into the copper, arranged symmetrically around a central cathode. Powerful permanent magnets surrounded the entire assembly. Its appearance was deceptively simple, almost crude. Yet initial testing suggested it generated enormous microwave power at frequencies German equipment couldn't create or reliably detect. Martini immediately ordered the device transported to Berlin under armed guard. He had seen enough to understand that this discovery might explain why Dönitz's submarines were dying at rates never before witnessed. The British had accomplished what German scientists had declared impossible. They had created a compact, powerful microwave radar system that could be mounted in aircraft and ships, providing detection capabilities against which Germany possessed no defenses whatsoever. The journey from mystery to the truth had actually begun months earlier, in the dark waters of the North Atlantic. Throughout late 1942 and into 1943, U-boat commanders had been filing increasingly disturbing reports about encounters with Allied aircraft that seemed to possess almost supernatural detection abilities. Captain Hans Joachim Schwantke, commanding U-43, filed a report in December 1942 that captured the growing crisis perfectly. His submarine had been transiting the Bay of Biscay on a moonless night, running on the surface to recharge its batteries when searchlights suddenly blazed directly overhead from the darkness. The METOX radar detector had given no warning. There had been no sound of engine noise, nothing to suggest an aircraft was approaching. Depth charges straddled his diving boat, causing damage severe enough to force an emergency return to port. "We were blind," Schwantke wrote in his war diary. The METOX gave no alarm. The aircraft materialized from the darkness itself. Only luck saved us. We heard the bombs falling and crash-dived with seconds to spare. That detector was supposed to give us several minutes warning, enough time to dive safely. Instead, we had nothing. Nothing at all. Either the British have created radar our detectors cannot sense, or they are using some technology we simply do not understand. Whatever the truth, we are being hunted by enemies we cannot detect until they are directly overhead attacking. Similar reports flooded into U-boat headquarters in Paris throughout the winter. Submarines were being caught on the surface at night with absolutely no warning whatsoever. Aircraft seemed to see through darkness and weather that should have provided complete cover. The METOX radar detectors, which had been giving U-boats advance warning of aircraft equipped with older ASV Mark the Sun radar operating at 1.5-meter wavelengths, had become worse than useless because commanders still believed they worked. The statistics told a horrifying story, one that would become catastrophic by spring. In November 1942, German U-boats sank approximately 119 merchant ships, totaling 729,000 tons worldwide, while losing 13 submarines. December brought 60 merchant ships totaling 330,000 tons sunk at the cost of 5 U-boats. By January 1943, sinkings had dropped to 37 ships, while U-boat losses had climbed to 7. February saw only 34 merchant ships sunk, while 17 U-boats were lost. The exchange rate that had once favored Germany heavily was collapsing at an accelerating pace. Admiral Karl Dönitz, promoted to Commander-in-Chief of the entire Kriegsmarine on January 30th, while retaining direct control of U-boat operations, watched these numbers with mounting alarm. His headquarters maintained detailed charts plotting every U-boat position, every convoy route, every engagement. The patterns emerging from these plots made no conventional sense according to traditional naval warfare doctrine. U-boats approaching convoys were being intercepted before they could mount any attack. Submarines transiting the Bay of Biscay under cover of night were being bombed with shocking accuracy. Submarines operating submerged during daylight were somehow being tracked and hit with depth charges. Allied aircraft appeared to possess an almost supernatural ability to locate submarines in conditions where normal visual detection would be impossible. Many of these attacks occurred in weather so poor that visual detection was completely ruled out. Yet the attacks came with devastating precision. Captain Günther Hessler, Dönitz's son-in-law, who had married his daughter Ursula in November 1937, served as first staff officer at U-boat headquarters. Hessler spent weeks analyzing combat reports, trying to find any logical explanation for the mysterious losses. The pattern was unmistakable but completely incomprehensible. Allied detection capabilities had improved dramatically in just a few months between late 1942 and early 1943, suggesting entirely new technology rather than better tactics or training. But what technology could possibly see through darkness, clouds and fog. What could detect a submarine's small conning tower from miles away? What could track a periscope wake or snorkel exhaust in conditions where human eyes would be completely useless? The questions multiplied faster than answers could be found. Dönitz convened crisis meetings with Germany's top scientists and engineers throughout January and February 1943. These discussions revealed disturbing gaps in German knowledge about Allied capabilities and troubling overconfidence about German technological superiority. German radar experts insisted firmly that no radar system could effectively operate at wavelengths shorter than about 50 centimeters due to fundamental limitations in power generation. The vacuum tube technology available to them, they argued, simply couldn't generate enough power at higher frequencies to make shorter wavelength radar practical for any military application. The METOX detectors, designed to detect Allied radar operating at 1.5-meter wavelengths, should theoretically warn of any aircraft equipped with radar. The system worked by detecting electromagnetic emissions from aircraft radar, giving U-boats several minutes to crash dive before an aircraft could close to attack range. Yet clearly these detectors were no longer providing adequate warning. Something had fundamentally changed in Allied capabilities, but what? Some scientists speculated that the Allies had developed infrared detection systems that could sense the heat signatures from U-boat diesel engines. Others suggested acoustic detection, though this seemed implausible at the distances involved in aircraft attacks. A few voices mentioned the theoretical possibility of centimetric radar using advanced magnetron technology, but this was dismissed as impractical. Germany's own research into such systems had concluded they offered no tactical advantage worth the enormous development investment required. The British could not possibly have solved problems that had defeated German engineering, the experts assured Dönitz. German science was the finest in the world. If German engineers had concluded centimetric radar was impractical, then it must be impractical. The Allies must be using some other approach, perhaps multiple detection methods working together. The idea that Britain, suffering from years of strategic bombing with its industrial base constantly under attack, could have developed radar technology superior to anything Germany possessed, seemed absurd to most German experts. This complacent certainty would be shattered completely when Runger's team at Telefunken began examining the Rotterdam device. The Magnetron arrived in Berlin on February 5, 1943, accompanied by photographs of the complete H2S installation and detailed reports from the crash site. Runger assembled Germany's top microwave specialists for what would become known as the Rotterdam Working Group. Their task was to determine exactly what the device was, how it functioned, and most importantly, what capabilities it gave the Allies. The first meeting of this working group occurred on February 22nd or 23rd at Telefunken's Berlin offices. Initial examination on February 6th revealed the magnetron's basic operating principle within hours. The cylindrical cavities acted as resonant chambers, generating and amplifying electromagnetic oscillations as electrons spiraled through the magnetic field created by the permanent magnets. It was conceptually similar to earlier magnetron designs that German engineers had experimented with in the 1930s, but built with an engineering sophistication that shocked the entire German team. Dr. Otto Hackenberg, a young physicist assigned to document the examination, would later recall the moment of realization in post-war interviews. When we first powered up the magnetron using laboratory equipment, the frequency counter registered 3.3 gigahertz, a frequency we could barely measure, let alone generate with any significant power. The output meter showed 40 kilowatts of peak power. It was like discovering the enemy-possessed artillery when you believed you were fighting with rifles. We understood immediately why the METOX was useless. It was built to detect meter-wavelength radar operating around 1.5 meters or 200 megahertz. This device operated at 9.1 centimeters wavelength, more than 16 times shorter. Our detectors were completely deaf to this radiation. The electromagnetic spectrum the British were exploiting was entirely outside the range our warning receivers could detect. We had been fighting blind the whole time, completely unaware that the enemy could see us clearly, while we saw nothing at all. Runger's team worked continuously for 2 weeks, carefully reverse engineering the complete H2S system from the wreckage and recovered components. The Magnetron powered a rotating antenna that scanned a complete 360-degree arc beneath the aircraft. Radar returns appeared on a plan position indicator cathode ray display, creating a map-like image showing coastlines, cities, rivers, and terrain features with remarkable clarity. For the first time, bomber crews could navigate accurately and identify their targets in complete darkness or through solid cloud cover. The system had been designed primarily for strategic bombing navigation, allowing Pathfinder aircraft to mark targets for following bomber streams regardless of weather conditions. British bombers could now attack Germany in weather that had previously offered natural protection. But the implications for submarine warfare ran even deeper than the applications for bombing campaigns. The same cavity magnetron technology, adapted for air-to-surface search radar designated as ASV Mark III, could detect a submarine's conning tower from 20 miles away in any weather, day or night. The small radar cross-section that had previously kept submarines hidden from detection meant nothing against this sensitive high-frequency system operating in the centimetric wavelength band. The British had developed something far more sinister than anything the Germans possessed. Their new centimetric radar emissions moved through the air completely invisible to German detection equipment. Every radar warning system the Germans had built, including the METOC receivers that submarines depended on for survival, operated on meter wavelengths. These devices could pick up signals between 1.3 and 2.6 meters, which meant they caught the ASV Mark II radar that Allied aircraft had been carrying since 1942. But this latest British system operated at 9.1 centimeters, meaning it transmitted at frequencies 17 times higher than anything German receivers could even sense. The U-boats were sailing blind into attacks they couldn't see coming, their defenses rendered completely useless without anyone realizing it. The technological advantage had shifted catastrophically in the Allies' favor. On February 23, 1943, the Rotterdam Working Group came together to share what they'd discovered with Germany's military brass and industrial manufacturers. Though no records confirm whether Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring or Admiral Dönitz walked into that meeting personally, both received detailed briefings about the findings. Every major German electronics company sent representatives, bringing together engineers from Telefunken, Siemens, AEG, and Lorenz. The conference room at Telefunken headquarters filled with senior Luftwaffe signals specialists and Kriegsmarine technical experts. The atmosphere felt heavy, urgent, grim. Runge stood to present findings that would be written into official minutes and later discovered by Allied investigators sorting through captured German documents. We must state plainly and honestly that the British have achieved a technological breakthrough of extraordinary proportions, he began. The cavity magnetron represents an advance in microwave generation that puts us 3 years behind by normal development timelines. But more immediately critical to our current operations is this reality. They have created radar detection systems against which we possess absolutely no countermeasures and no defenses whatsoever. The presentation explained the CV-64 magnetron's technical specifications in detail: 8 resonant cavities carved into a copper block, operating frequency of 3.3 GHz, wavelength of 9.1 centimeters, peak power output reaching 40 kilowatts, compact enough to fit into aircraft, built robustly enough to survive combat conditions. The manufacturing quality suggested established production rather than experimental testing. The implications struck everyone present like a physical blow. If the British could make these devices in large quantities, and the manufacturing quality indicated they could, then every single Allied aircraft and ship might soon carry radar systems Germany couldn't defend against. The METOC warning receivers became useless overnight. The entire German radar network operating at meter wavelengths was becoming increasingly obsolete. German night fighters depended on radar they could no longer compete with. German anti-aircraft defenses relied on radar technology the British had leapfrogged by a generation. German naval vessels operated systems that were already outdated. When Göring received this briefing, possibly at the humble tin flak tower in Berlin, where technicians had reassembled the captured H-2S system for demonstration, his response showed considerable alarm. The Reichsmarschall, who had boasted back in 1939 that no enemy bombs would ever fall on Germany, now stared at evidence that British bombers could navigate and strike in any weather using technology Germany simply couldn't match. Dönitz understood the implications more clearly than virtually anyone else in Germany's high command when the information reached him through staff channels. His submarine fleet had been hemorrhaging boats. The first 2 months of 1943 showed catastrophic losses, with 7 boats lost in January and 17 in February, totaling 24 boats for those 2 months alone. Add December's losses, and the 3-month tally reached 39 submarines. If this rate continued, the entire U-boat campaign would collapse within months. Captain Eberhard Gott, who served as Dönitz's operations chief and had been promoted to Commodore in March 1943, maintained meticulous statistical records of U-boat operations. The data told a story darker with each entry. Throughout the first quarter of 1943, German U-boats were being destroyed faster than shipyards could replace them, even though production ran at approximately 20 to 24 boats each month. But the real crisis emerged in the personnel situation. Experienced sailors and trained crews were dying faster than training programs could produce new ones. The assembled officers from the various technical and military organizations reached conclusions that were grim and inescapable, documented in classified reports that Allied forces would later capture. First, Germany could not manufacture cavity magnetrons in any meaningful quantity before late 1944 at the absolute earliest. The precision machining required to cut those resonant cavities, the specialized copper alloys needed, the powerful permanent magnets using cobalt that Germany possessed in insufficient quantities. The manufacturing expertise required all of it remained beyond current German capabilities. Even a crash program would consume months just getting production lines operational. Second, effective countermeasures would demand at minimum 6 months of development time. New radar warning receivers tuned to centimetric frequencies might theoretically be designed, but equipping and installing them across every U-boat would stretch deep into 1944. The technical difficulties of building receivers sensitive to 3.3 GHz emissions were formidable given how little experience Germany had with microwave technology. Third, and most devastating of all, the British certainly possessed variants beyond what had been captured. The Rotterdam device operated at 9.1 centimeters. British scientists likely had already created or were actively developing 3-centimeter systems that would render even newly developed German countermeasures obsolete before anyone could install them. The technological race wasn't merely lost, it was unwinnable within any realistic wartime timeframe. Dönitz absorbed these briefings with deepening awareness of the catastrophe engulfing his command. His U-boat headquarters relocated to the Paris area in March 1942, following the Saint-Nazaire commando raid that had exposed the previous location's vulnerability, maintained precise plots of every engagement, every loss, every tactical shift. The maps covering the operations room walls communicated what statistics couldn't capture as clearly. The red pins marking U-boat positions had thinned dramatically across the North Atlantic. Blue pins indicating Allied convoy routes seemed to flow through areas where German wolf packs should have intercepted them. Black pins marking destroyed submarines clustered ominously along the transit routes through the Bay of Biscay and in the operational zones where boats encountered Allied air patrols. "We have been fighting blind," Dönitz told his senior staff in the briefings that followed the Rotterdam device examination. "Every advantage we believed we held has been neutralized by Allied technology we didn't know existed. Nighttime surprise attacks mean nothing when your enemy can see through darkness. The Atlantic's vast expanse provides no concealment when radar can detect a conning tower from 20 miles away. Our radar warning systems gave us false confidence while offering no actual protection against this new threat." Dönitz faced an impossible question: what could be done while German industry scrambled to develop countermeasures that might not exist until 1944? Gott proposed tactical adjustments. All commanders would receive word that radar warning systems had become unreliable and shouldn't be trusted for adequate air attack warning. U-boats would spend maximum time submerged, surfacing only when absolutely necessary for battery recharging or to transit at higher speeds. Anti-aircraft weapons would be increased on every boat, though everyone recognized this as a desperate gamble against aircraft that could spot U-boats long before the submarines could even see the planes. Most critically, Dönitz and his staff began confronting the possibility that the Atlantic U-boat campaign might become unsustainable. If losses continued at existing rates while Allied shipbuilding capacity continued expanding, the mathematics would become impossible. Germany would lose the tonnage war, unable to sink merchant ships faster than Allied yards could build replacements. March 1943 represented the high point and simultaneously the beginning of the end for Dönitz's submarine force. That month featured the war's largest convoy battles, with massive wolf packs containing 30 to 40 boats attempting to overwhelm convoy defenses through sheer numbers. For a brief moment, the strategy seemed viable despite the mounting Allied technological advantages. Convoys HX-229 and SC-122, sailing together through the North Atlantic in mid-March, faced assault from approximately 40 U-boats spread across 3 wolf packs. The fighting raged from March 16th through March 20th, 1943. 21 merchant ships totaling 141,000 tons went down, the heaviest losses from any single convoy engagement of the entire war. The British Admiralty issued a classified assessment stating that Germany had never come closer to severing Britain's Atlantic lifeline, though the price Germany paid proved unsustainable. The attacking U-boats lost one boat definitively, U-384, though several others took damage. Yet March's broader statistics revealed something troubling. Between 12 and 15 U-boats disappeared during the month, depending on how losses were counted, with many destroyed in areas completely separate from the major convoy battles. The mathematics offered no escape. Even when achieving tactical victories and sinking merchant vessels, the strategic situation deteriorated steadily. Allied shipyards, particularly the rapidly expanding American construction program, were building merchant vessels faster than U-boats could sink them. The Liberty ship program had slashed construction time from over 200 days in 1941 down to an average of 42 days by 1944. Though individual ships like the SS Robert E. Perry had been built in record time, 4 days, 15 hours and 29 minutes in November 1942, these represented propaganda achievements rather than standard production rates. Yet American yards were still launching roughly 3 Liberty ships every 2 days at peak production, approximately 1.5 ships daily. German U-boats that sank an average of 3,000 to 5,000 tons per boat before being destroyed couldn't compete with that production rate. So long as Allied shipyards replaced losses faster than U-boats could inflict them, the campaign represented strategic defeat disguised as tactical success. To win the tonnage war meant maintaining an unsustainable exchange ratio while simultaneously avoiding losses Germany couldn't replace. The crisis came in May 1943, the month U-boat crews would call Black May. Throughout those 31 days, Allied aircraft and surface escorts carrying centimetric ASV, Mark III radar, and Type 271 shipboard radar devastated the U-boat force with unprecedented effectiveness. The convoy battle for ONS-5 in late April and early May marked the turning point. This slow convoy of 43 merchant vessels, protected by 16 escort ships, came under attack from approximately 30 U-boats. Germans managed to sink 12 to 13 merchant ships, but lost 6 to 7 U-boats, with 5 to 7 more suffering severe damage. For the first time in a major convoy battle, U-boat losses approached their successes. The exchange ratio had become untenable. 2 weeks later, convoy SC-130 demonstrated complete Allied superiority. This convoy contained 37 to 38 merchant ships. Not one was lost despite attacks from 25 to 33 U-boats positioned across 3 patrol lines. German forces lost 3 to 5 U-boats, including U-954. The decisive Allied victory signaled the last seriously threatened convoy of 1943. Throughout May, the losses mounted relentlessly. U-209 was sunk on May 4th in the North Atlantic, with all 46 crew members lost. On May 5th, both U-447 and U-663 were destroyed. May 6th brought the sinking of U-465 and U-563. May 11th saw the losses of U-89, U-186 and U-456. U-528 was depth-charged on May 12th, with all hands going down. May 15th marked the destruction of U-176. May 19th brought the deaths of U-273 and U-954. That day held particular personal significance for Admiral Dönitz. The Type 7C U-boat U-954, commanded by Captain Lieutenant and Odo Locker, carried among its crew the Admiral's youngest son, Peter Dönitz, serving as a watch officer. The submarine was attacking convoy SC-130 when the River-class frigate HMS Jed and the Banff-class sloop HMS Sharpshooter detected it. The British escorts pursued the contact with Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars and depth charges. Hedgehog, introduced in 1942, represented a significant tactical advance over conventional depth charges. Rather than exploding at preset depths, regardless of whether they hit anything, Hedgehog projectiles detonated only on direct contact. This meant explosions confirmed actual hits rather than simply churning water and degrading sonar contact. U-954 was destroyed with all 47 crew members killed at coordinates 54 degrees 54 minutes north, 34 degrees 19 minutes west. Dönitz received word by secure telegraph. U-954 attacked and sunk by British escorts HMS Jed and Sharpshooter. Hedgehog weapons achieved direct hit. No survivors. Your son is gone. Dönitz didn't pause operations or request leave. Grief would wait until after the war if Germany survived. His responsibility now lay with the approximately 40,000 submariners under his command, the living men depending on his decisions. The personal tragedy, devastating though it was, could not interfere with operational duties at this critical juncture. The entire U-boat campaign hung on the precipice. By May 22, 1943, the operational U-boat force had lost between 41 and 43 boats during the month alone, depending on how losses were classified. According to U-boat.net records, 42 boats were lost with 10,650 men killed and 1,837 survivors. The exact tally of sunken submarines varied depending on the source consulted. Some records indicated 41 combat losses, while others counted 43 when including vessels withdrawn from active service entirely. Whatever the precise number, the destruction represented roughly a quarter of Germany's operational U-boat fleet, obliterated in just 3 weeks. For German naval strategy, this casualty rate proved absolutely catastrophic and unsustainable. Admiral Dönitz summoned his operations staff for an emergency meeting on May 24, 1943. The tactical display before them told a brutal story. In 3 short weeks, a full quarter of the operational force had been erased. Casualty figures shattered every previous record. The numbers seemed almost impossible to absorb. Veteran commanders were perishing faster than training academies could produce replacements. Fresh vessels were going down on maiden patrols before their crews mastered even basic survival tactics. The youngest officers, men destined to lead the fleet in 1944 and 1945, were losing their lives in the cold Atlantic at just 23 or 24 years old, their futures and capabilities vanishing forever. On that same day, May 24, 1943, Dönitz faced perhaps the most agonizing choice of his entire naval career. He composed an order that amounted to acknowledging defeat in the Atlantic struggle. The message went out to every U-boat still at sea. Due to enemy location capabilities far superior to ours, combined with overwhelming aerial superiority, all North Atlantic operations cease immediately. Every submarine currently positioned in the North Atlantic must relocate immediately to waters southwest of the Azores. Boats already en route to their operational zones should divert toward ports in the Bay of Biscay. Any future offensive operations will resume only after German engineers develop better detection systems and stronger defensive weaponry against air attack. We have not been vanquished, we have simply faced facts. The consequences appeared immediately in the convoy records. Merchant tonnage sunk across the Atlantic dropped to just 17 vessels during June 1943. July saw only 9 ships go down. The vital supply corridor that had seemed close to complete severance in March suddenly became secure. The enormous armada assembled for D-Day, the vast fleet that would carry liberation across Europe, gathered safely in American shipyards, shielded by innovations that had rendered Germany's most lethal naval weapon useless. Still, the human price continued mounting through the remaining war years. Close to 40,000 sailors crewed U-boats throughout the conflict. Approximately 30,000 would not survive, representing a devastating 75% casualty rate, the worst suffered by any military branch on either side throughout the entire war. Men perished in multiple horrifying ways. Steel pressure hulls imploded under the crushing force of depth charges. Suffocation claimed sailors when air circulation systems failed during relentless underwater bombardment. Diesel fuel burst into flame when combat damage compromised boat integrity. Sailors froze in northern waters or succumbed to heat in tropical seas when submarines remained submerged for days beyond safe limits. These men understood their predicament fully. Their equipment lagged behind Allied capability. Their assignments held diminishing strategic value. Their deaths advanced nothing toward German victory. Yet they continued their struggle because honor obligated them to do so. Stopping would free enemy forces to concentrate elsewhere, hastening collapse everywhere. Intelligence officers interrogating captured U-boat personnel during summer and autumn 1943 encountered something perplexing. Prisoners who months before had believed in German triumph now displayed profound despair. The officers gradually comprehended what they were witnessing. These submariners had not experienced defeat through traditional combat. Science had rendered them obsolete. Advanced technology hunted them relentlessly, technology they could neither perceive nor overcome. Captain Lieutenant Werner Henke commanded U-515 with considerable effectiveness, sending multiple cargo vessels to the bottom and earning the Knight's Cross for his achievements. On April 9, 1944, however, his vessel fell victim to American Task Group 22.3, centered on the escort carrier USS Guadalcanal and its destroyer consorts. Roughly 40 sailors, including Henke, were pulled from the water and captured. At Fort Hunt, Virginia, officially designated P.O. Box 1142, interrogators questioned Henke intensively. His testimony, kept secret until 1985, eventually revealed classified details about German naval technology and tactical awareness. The released interrogation transcripts shed profound light on the despair that gripped experienced commanders confronting electronic superiority. Henke stated that he had recognized Germany's defeat by mid-1943, not because Germans fought without courage or competence, but because Allied electronic equipment systematically stripped away every advantage we had built. Our METOX detection system became worthless against their new radar. Crews called it the grave bell. When it failed to detect approaching planes, only our deaths followed. Later receivers theoretically capable of sensing their latest systems arrived far too slowly to matter. The Naxos apparatus, brought into service during September 1943, might detect newer radar frequencies. Yet even when functional, detection occurred only at minimal ranges, while Allied aircraft spotted us from distances beyond what human eyes could perceive. We could submerge when warned, but circling planes simply transmitted our position to waiting destroyers. We could not escape adversaries we could not see until destruction arrived. The interrogation took a sinister turn when Henke faced accusations of war crimes connected to the SS Ceramic, a passenger liner sunk by U-515 in December 1942. Facing potential transfer to British custody for trial, Henke grew increasingly desperate. On June 15, 1944, he attempted climbing the barrier fence surrounding the compound. Sentries opened fire, killing him instantly. He became Fort Hunt's sole escape casualty throughout the entire war. Oberleutnant Herbert Werner endured 5 separate U-boat assignments during the war, surviving the destruction of U-612 in August 1942 and U-415 in July 1944. His published memoir, Iron Coffins, released in 1969, offers one of the most respected German accounts of submarine warfare. Werner explored the emotional damage inflicted by confronting superior enemy technology. Every mission after May 1943 became fundamentally a survival test, masquerading as military operations. Allied detection equipment perceived our periscope wakes, our snorkel exhaust, even our raised conning towers. We remained submerged far longer than submarine design permitted, breathing increasingly foul atmosphere, restricting battery discharge, surfacing only when fuel and air reserves mandated it. The Atlantic had transformed. Once our hunting ground in 1942, it now represented a threat exceeding any British warship. Fog concealed enemy aircraft overhead. Distant horizons masked hostile surface vessels. Meanwhile, technology revealed our presence to every opponent within range. We faced attackers our sensors could not identify until impact occurred. Capitan Peter Erich Kremer captained U-333 through numerous productive patrols, becoming one of merely 3 senior submarine commanders to survive the war entirely. His published account U-Boat Commander, published in 1984, furnished additional perspective on technological developments that destroyed Germany's submarine campaign. Kremer described a June 1943 patrol near Africa, implemented following the North Atlantic withdrawal. Command directed us toward isolated targets in regions without concentrated air operations. Yet adversary aircraft materialized with improbable frequency across those enormous open waters. One afternoon, our new Wanzer detection apparatus picked up enemy planes at exceptional distance. I commanded an immediate descent to 150 meters, establishing silent operations. We remained submerged 6 exhausting hours, far exceeding recommended safety parameters. Upon resurfacing to operate our snorkel apparatus, the aircraft appeared again within moments, forcing another rapid submerged dash. This sequence repeated for 14 continuous hours, while battery reserves dwindled dangerously. Surfacing became mandatory, or we would suffocate underground. When we emerged, the aircraft sat poised perfectly for its strike. Vigorous defensive gunfire and an emergency dive narrowly prevented catastrophic pressure failure. We launched no torpedoes that entire patrol. We consumed 3 weeks attempting to evade long enough to attack any target whatsoever. Enemy mastery of electronic warfare proved so overwhelming that we struggled to execute our fundamental objective. German research efforts persisted throughout 1943 and 1944, while technical teams desperately pursued countermeasures. Engineers produced the LMS-10 Magnetron, essentially replicating the British CV-64 design, with at minimum 4 units reaching completion by May 1943. Manufacturing faced severe limitations, particularly scarcity of cobalt needed for permanent magnets. Early production required salvaging magnets from captured aircraft, rendering large-scale manufacture impossible. Telefunken initiated work on the indigenous LMS-12 Magnetron design, attempting to modify the British approach utilizing materials obtainable within Germany. Yet this initiative would not achieve even modest production until April 1944, far too tardy to alter warfare outcomes. By then, the Atlantic conflict had been thoroughly lost for nearly 12 months. German cavity magnetron production totaled mere hundreds across all designs when fighting concluded, likely fewer than 1,000 units total. This contrasted sharply against Allied manufacture, which reached tens of thousands. While precise 1943 production numbers remain uncertain, industrial capability and resource availability ensured Germany could never approach Allied manufacturing throughput. Radar detection receivers, sensitive to centimetric frequencies, developed through simultaneous research initiatives. The Naxos system, designated FUG-350 for aircraft and FUMB-7 for submarines, commenced operations in September 1943. Theoretically, these devices warned submarines of approaching aircraft, equipped with ASV Mark III radar transmitting on 9.1 centimeter wavelength. However, when Naxos entered active service, Allied science had already deployed 3 centimeter radar systems against which Naxos proved completely blind. American H-2X apparatus and improved H-2S equipment operated on 3 centimeter wavelength, demanding entirely new detection technology. Germany perpetually lagged one technological generation behind, forever combating yesterday's threats while contemporary systems rendered their defenses worthless before widespread installation occurred. A Ju-88 night fighter equipped with Naxos apparatus did land at a British Royal Air Force base, though not during November 1943 as sometimes recounted. On July 13, 1944, a Ju-88G1 touched down at RAF Woodbridge, carrying Fugue 330 Naxos Z, Flensburg detection systems, and Liechtenstein SN2 radar. Navigation confusion led the crew to believe they approached a German installation. British technical specialists immediately examined the captured equipment, acquiring substantial understanding of German electronic countermeasures. Analysis demonstrated that despite German engineering sophistication and functional Naxos operation, the system remained fundamentally passive. It sensed but could not respond offensively. Critically, detection capability extended only to 9.1 cm frequencies from first-generation Allied equipment, missing newer 3 cm systems entering operational service. The German Navy pursued tactical responses intended to compensate for electronic disadvantage. Additional defensive cannon armament was fitted to submarines, with certain boats designated flak boats mounting quad 20mm weapons and heavy anti-aircraft systems. The strategic reasoning suggested that if submarines could not remain hidden from radar-equipped aircraft, they should stay surfaced and engage with defensive firepower. Combat experience demonstrated this approach catastrophically. Allied aircraft possessed detection ranges vastly exceeding effective anti-aircraft weapon reach. Attacking craft selected optimal approach angles, frequently from sun direction or cloud cover, allowing submarine crews mere seconds to man weapons. Aircraft speed advantage granted attackers complete initiative regarding timing and approach. The stationary submarine merely awaited incoming assault. Radio warnings from attacked aircraft summoned additional forces, particularly surface vessels that annihilated defenseless submarines with ease. Flakboat operations consumed more submarines than hostile aircraft destroyed, representing another unsuccessful tactical solution to technological inferiority. Acoustic-seeking torpedoes, designated G7ES or T5 and codenamed Zaunkönig, entered service in September 1943 as convoy escort countermeasures. Initial delivery of 80 units occurred on August 1, 1943, with substantial deployment beginning against convoys ONS-18 and ON-202 during late September. These weapons tracked escort vessel propeller vibrations, theoretically enabling U-boats to eliminate protective escorts before attacking cargo ships. Early deployment proved moderately successful, damaging or sinking numerous escort vessels. The Allies developed countermeasures rapidly, particularly the Foxer noisemaker device towed behind ships to mislead acoustic weapons. More fundamentally, acoustic torpedoes offered no benefit if U-boats could not detect convoys initially. When Allied radar discovered submarines before they approached convoy formations, acoustic torpedo capability provided no tactical advantage. Innovative submarine construction incorporating snorkel technology represented yet another adaptation strategy confronting Allied electronic dominance. The snorkel concept originated from Dutch engineering, developed in 1938, captured when German forces invaded the Netherlands during 1940, and initially dismissed by German planners. German technical personnel commenced snorkel testing aboard U-58 during mid-1943, with operational deployment beginning in early 1944. This apparatus enabled diesel engine operation while submarines remained at periscope depth, charging battery reserves and traveling submerged. Such capability reduced aircraft radar exposure substantially. Snorkels seemed like they might solve the U-boat problem, but they were nowhere near perfect. The moment a submarine pushed one above the surface, radar operators could spot it easily, especially when the ocean lay calm and flat. Even with a snorkel, boats could only creep along at a handful of knots. More troubling still, rough seas demanded exceptional seamanship to manage safely. Whenever waves crashed over the snorkel intake, automatic valves would slam shut without warning, instantly cutting off the air supply and creating sudden, dangerous pressure changes inside the hull that left crews gasping and disoriented. By the middle of 1944, about half the U-boats operating from French ports had been fitted with snorkels. This upgrade kept some boats alive longer, but it could never fix what had already gone fundamentally wrong. Snorkel-equipped submarines might dodge the occasional attack, yet they lacked the firepower to devastate merchant shipping enough to damage Allied supply lines anymore. The Battle of the Atlantic had already been decided, and Germany had lost it decisively. Germany's final technological gamble came with the Type 21 Electroboot, a radical submarine unlike anything they'd built before. This sleek design boasted a streamlined hull, 3 times the battery capacity of earlier models, and could move underwater at 17.2 knots compared to just 7.6 knots for the standard Type 7. It carried 6 torpedo tubes fitted with hydraulic reloading systems that could launch 18 torpedoes in less than 20 minutes. The boat also featured cutting-edge sonar equipment that gave it capabilities far beyond anything else in the German fleet. Theoretically, the Type 21 could outrun most surface escorts while submerged and remain below for extended stretches. Had this design entered service in 1943 instead of 1945, the Atlantic campaign might have taken a dramatically different turn. But the pressure to produce boats quickly led to serious manufacturing flaws. Out of 118 Type 21s built, only 4 were actually ready for combat when the war ended. Just 2 managed to conduct operational patrols in April and May of 1945, and neither achieved any confirmed sinkings before Germany surrendered. The final U-boat mission of the entire war would show both what this revolutionary design might have accomplished and just how pointless German efforts had become. U-2511, the first Type 21 Electroboot to actually see combat, slipped out on April 30, 1945, under the command of Corvette Captain Adalbert Schnee, one of the most decorated and tactically brilliant U-boat commanders Germany had ever produced. What happened over the next few days perfectly captured both the boat's remarkable potential and the tragedy of timing. On May 4th, U-2511 picked up a British cruiser task force on its instruments and maneuvered into perfect attack position while staying completely hidden from Allied radar. The boat's superior underwater speed and nearly silent operation allowed it to move within firing range undetected, an accomplishment that should have been impossible against such a well-equipped enemy formation. Schnee had the enemy at his mercy. He didn't fire. Germany had already begun announcing surrender discussions. Instead, he brought the boat to the surface and radioed his position on May 5, 1945, ending the U-boat campaign not with an explosion, but with an acknowledgement of defeat. Later, Schnee would write about the day in his memoirs with a sense of tragic irony. "We showed that day exactly what the Type 21 could have done if we'd gotten it into service just 12 months sooner," he reflected. But proving it meant nothing. The Allies had already won through sheer industrial power and technological advances they'd deployed years earlier in 1942 and 1943. By the time our most advanced technology arrived, the war was already beyond saving. The numbers from the Battle of the Atlantic tell a story written in radar signals and sunken ships. The cavity magnetron's appearance in early 1943 marked the exact moment when everything changed. During the 5 months from January through May 1943, while new ASV Mark III radar was being rolled out, but coverage wasn't yet complete, U-boats sent 245 merchant vessels to the bottom, destroying roughly 1,289,000 tons of cargo and supplies. Germany lost 95 U-boats during that same period, with a staggering 41 of them disappearing in May alone. Then the landscape shifted. From June 1943 through May 1944, after centimetric radar equipped the majority of Allied aircraft and escort vessels operating across the Atlantic, merchant ship sinkings plummeted to 185 ships, totaling around 819,000 tons, even though Germany had more submarines at sea than before. German losses in that same 12-month period jumped to 237 U-boats. The killing ratio had completely reversed. March 1943 represented the absolute peak of German submarine success. That single month, U-boats destroyed 82 merchant ships, totaling 476,000 tons just in the Atlantic, with 120 ships sunk worldwide for a total of 693,000 tons, while losing only 12 submarines. By summer 1943, after radar became widespread among Allied forces, a typical month might see fewer than 20 merchant ships sunk, while U-boat losses stayed firmly in double digits. The tonnage war had become impossible to win. May 1943 was Germany's last real opportunity. That's when the examination of the Rotterdam device occurred in February 1943. German commanders finally understood something they'd suspected but desperately hoped wasn't true. The Allies possessed technological capabilities so far beyond German knowledge that all the tactical brilliance and courage in the world couldn't compensate. Detection advantages that couldn't be overcome through any amount of skill or bravery had shifted the entire balance. When Allied technical teams later inspected captured U-boats, they discovered the frantic measures German engineers had attempted. Some boats had been covered with experimental radar-absorbent coatings, crude early attempts at stealth that added weight, hurt performance, and barely reduced radar returns. The materials available to Germany in 1943 and 1944 simply weren't adequate for absorbing radar energy at centimetric wavelengths. Other submarines carried inflatable balloons meant to create fake radar targets on enemy screens. Devices that occasionally worked but couldn't be deployed while submerged or during rough weather, making them nearly useless in actual combat conditions. Still others had modified exhaust pipes designed to reduce the radar signature of snorkels, changes that wasted diesel fuel while barely affecting enemy detection. Every adaptation represented brilliant German engineering devoted to solving a problem that was ultimately unsolvable. You cannot hide from electromagnetic waves using only mechanical tricks. Physics doesn't negotiate. Allied radar operated at wavelengths and power levels that made submarines visible regardless of darkness or evasive maneuvers or whatever else commanders tried. Complete submersion offered the only real protection, but batteries in 1943 and 1944 couldn't support the extended underwater periods necessary to escape detection completely. German submarines found themselves trapped by the limits of their own technology. They were visible to enemies they couldn't see, hunted by weapons they couldn't effectively counter, forced to operate in an electromagnetic realm where the Allies held complete and total dominance. Perhaps the most revealing evidence comes from psychological reports compiled from German naval officers. These weren't desperate soldiers inventing excuses for failure. They were highly trained technical experts who knew precisely what had gone wrong. Their testimony from interrogation reports, personal correspondence, and post-war writings consistently points to the same truth. Not tactical mistakes or operational errors, but fundamental technological obsolescence. They described the helplessness of fighting foes with superior detection systems, while German forces remained essentially blind. They explained the creeping fatalism that infected crews who knew discovery was inevitable and that survival depended on luck rather than ability. They document the shift from confident warriors to hunted fugitives, a transformation that occurred not through military combat, but through technological revelation. When Oberleutnant Helmuth Runge examined the Rotterdam device in February 1943, he performed an autopsy on German naval strategy. That copper block sitting on his laboratory workbench explained every mysterious U-boat loss, every impossible aircraft interception, every convoy battle where Allied forces seemed to anticipate German movements before attacks even developed. The cavity magnetron showed that Germany had been waging the Battle of the Atlantic while deaf and blind to the electromagnetic spectrum, a realm where Allied forces operated with complete command and devastating effectiveness. That revelation struck deeper than any military defeat ever could. It shattered German confidence in technological superiority and any hope of strategic victory. It convinced German leadership that Allied capabilities exceeded German understanding, not just in radar systems, but potentially everywhere else too. If the British could invent revolutionary radar systems in secret, all while enduring years of relentless bombing, what other developments might they deploy? This psychological shift, this loss of confidence in German technological supremacy, influenced every defensive plan and redirected precious resources toward countermeasure programs that arrived months too late to matter. Intelligence assessments after Rotterdam grew more cautious, always assuming enemies possessed weapons Germany didn't yet know about. By autumn 1943, hundreds of Allied aircraft and ships carried centimetric radar systems. The Type 271 naval radar using cavity magnetron technology went onto convoy escorts beginning in 1941, letting them detect surface submarines from up to 20 kilometers away and spot periscopes from roughly 900 yards. The system broadcast at 9.7 centimeter wavelength with 70 kilowatts of peak power. The ASV Mark III airborne radar-equipped RAF Coastal Command aircraft starting in March 1943, enabling them to patrol thousands of square kilometers of ocean and detect U-boats regardless of weather or visibility. The American H-2X radar, an advanced version of H-2S operating at 3-centimeter wavelength, gave bomber crews navigation and targeting abilities that made weather and darkness completely irrelevant to bombing operations. Every system traced back to the same groundbreaking cavity magnetron technology that Runge had examined that February day in 1943. That captured Rotterdam device had been the skeleton key unlocking Allied electromagnetic dominance across the entire theater. German efforts to counter this advantage consumed staggering resources for negligible operational results. The Naxos radar warning receiver program drained scientific talent and manufacturing capacity that could have built offensive weapons or reinforced other defensive systems. U-boat construction shifted toward designs optimized for underwater work, reducing production of conventional submarines that might have been more valuable against less sophisticated opponents in secondary areas. Research teams pursued exotic approaches, including underwater television systems, passive sonar networks, and hydrogen peroxide propulsion systems. None reached operational status before the war ended. Each represented German technical brilliance, chasing solutions to problems Allied technology had created and would overcome before German countermeasures could even be manufactured and deployed. When you add up all the numbers from the Battle of the Atlantic, a clear picture emerges. Industrial power and technological innovation overwhelmed any amount of tactical skill or operational courage. Germany built approximately 1,181 U-boats during the entire war. Of these, 785 were destroyed, with 648 lost to enemy action and others scuttled, lost to accidents, or stricken from registers. Only 156 survived to surrender in May 1945. Of the roughly 40,000 men who served aboard submarines during the war, approximately 30,000 died, a casualty rate of 75%. This represented the highest casualty rate of any military service on either side throughout the entire conflict. These men displayed extraordinary courage and technical skill, but neither courage nor skill could overcome the fundamental technological disadvantage created by Allied radar superiority. The cavity magnetron, invented at Birmingham University between 1939 and 1940 and developed by GEC for practical military use, represented one of World War II's most significant technological breakthroughs. Its influence extended far beyond immediate military applications. Microwave technology developed for military radar became the foundation for post-war communication systems, television broadcasts, satellite networks, and eventually the microwave ovens in kitchens everywhere. Manufacturing expertise developed for magnetron production enabled the electronics revolution that transformed the 1950s and 1960s. The Anglo-American scientific partnership, exemplified by the TIZAD mission's sharing of magnetron technology in 1940, established collaboration patterns that would continue through the Cold War and beyond. The decision to deploy groundbreaking technology, despite capture risks, shaped military technology policy for decades. The cavity magnetron demonstrated that operational advantage from advanced technology outweighed risks of enemy exploitation, provided industrial capacity could produce the technology in quantities the enemy couldn't match. That principle guided Western military development through the jet age, the nuclear era, and into the information age. The willingness to deploy new capabilities quickly, accepting that adversaries would eventually copy or counter them, proved far more effective than keeping technology locked in laboratories while pursuing perfect security. For Germany's U-boat force, the narrative concluded in surrender and scuttling. On May 4, 1945, Grand Admiral Dönitz, briefly serving as German head of state following Hitler's suicide on April 30th, commanded all U-boats to halt offensive operations. On May 8th, after Germany's unconditional surrender, Operation Deadlight commenced. All remaining submarines at sea received orders to surface, display black flags, and proceed to designated Allied ports for formal surrender. Many commanders chose instead to scuttle their boats, unwilling to watch vessels carrying the memories of fallen comrades pass into enemy hands. The operational order Rainbow, named after the scuttling of the German High Seas Fleet at Scapa Flow in 1919, resulted in more than 200 U-boats being deliberately sunk by their own crews rather than surrendered to Allied forces. The men who had served in those submarines, the 75% who perished and the 25% who endured, had fought a campaign decided not by courage or tactics, but by physics and metallurgy. They had been defeated by electromagnetic radiation generated by a precisely machined block of copper produced in British factories, installed in Allied aircraft and ships, deployed in quantities German industry could never manufacture, given the material shortages, relentless bombing, and industrial capacity constraints facing the Third Reich. That captured radar set, examined in February 1943, had revealed their doom, exposing the electromagnetic dimension of warfare in which Germany had been fighting blind while the Allies possessed clear sight. Both statistical evidence and technological analysis pointed toward the same inescapable conclusion. The cavity magnetron had shifted the Battle of the Atlantic more decisively than any tactical innovation or strategic choice. When Allied scientists reflected on the magnetron's wartime impact after 1945, they frequently cited a statement attributed to American physicist Luis Alvarez, who had worked on radar development at MIT's Radiation Laboratory. The cavity magnetron, Alvarez reportedly stated, won the Battle of the Atlantic, won the air war over Germany, and ultimately won the war itself. While this statement simplified complex historical causation involving numerous factors, technical evidence provided compelling support for the magnetron's crucial contribution. Without centimetric radar, Allied convoy losses would probably have remained catastrophic throughout 1943 and into 1944. Without radar-equipped aircraft providing air protection, U-boats would have continued operating with relative safety in areas beyond reach of shore-based air coverage. Without the detection advantage magnetron technology delivered, D-Day preparations would have faced dangerous submarine threats to the enormous logistics network required for the Normandy landings. The magnetron, derived from fundamental microwave physics research at Birmingham University, manufactured in tens of thousands across American and British production facilities, distributed widely enough to maintain consistent coverage of crucial ocean regions, had created an electromagnetic advantage that tightened progressively around German naval forces until effective operations became impossible. The examination in Telefunken headquarters in February 1943 had been an autopsy, not a diagnosis. By the moment German scientists grasped what Allied technology had accomplished, the strategic outcome was already determined. Ultimately, the story of the Rotterdam device transcends the specific history of radar technology or submarine battles. It represents the overwhelming advantage that advanced technology provides when deployed at industrial scale against opponents lacking the scientific knowledge, industrial capacity, and material resources to match or counter it. It demonstrates how fighting enemies with capabilities you cannot match transforms confident warriors into hunted prey through the revelation of technological inferiority. Most profoundly, it illustrates how a block of copper, 8 centimeters in diameter, precisely machined with 8 resonant cavities arranged around a central cathode, altered the course of history by rendering the invisible visible and the concealed exposed. The German admirals and scientists who examined that captured radar set comprehended perhaps more clearly than anyone else in the Third Reich that they were witnessing not simply Allied technological achievement, but the instrument of German defeat. The mathematics were irrefutable, the physics merciless, the strategic implications inescapable. They returned from Berlin to their commands, carrying knowledge that their finest submarines and bravest crews could never overcome the electromagnetic advantage Allied science had created and Allied industry had deployed in quantities sufficient to win wars. They continued fighting because duty required it, and because hope fades slowly. But they understood the truth. Examining that single device had shown them the future, and in that future, Germany had already fallen.